Who is that masked man? Find out on this episode of Talk Gnosis as we discuss Martinism and the Gnostic path. Hi, welcome to Talk Gnosis for January 8th, 2014. I'm Bishop Kenneth Canterbury, and as always, I'm being joined by my lovely co-host, Bishop Lainey Peterson. Hello, Lainey. How are you this evening?
Hello, I am wonderful. Survived the cold spell we had here in Chicago.
Yeah, you guys had some nasty weather there.
We did.
You know, us here in Florida, we've been complaining about our cold, and we got a cold yesterday, 41 degrees, and that was enough to make us go nuts. But I can't imagine, about 80 degrees or so colder that you guys had.
Exactly.
You know, so it's all relative, I guess. Well, tonight we've got a really interesting discussion. We're going to be discussing Martinism and how it kind of pertains in the Gnostic path. And joining us tonight is one of our good friends and brothers, Gnostic Bishop and Martinist, Monsignor Martin Jacob. Welcome, brother, to Talk Gnosis. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. It's been a good day.
Good. Well, I think we're just going to kind of jump right into this. And Martin, since you're our guest tonight, we're going to probably be bombarding you with some questions. But, I think for many of our viewers, they're not really familiar with what Martinism is. So how would you describe Martinism? What is Martinism to you?
It is an initiatic tradition that has both a cosmology involving the source of man and his fall, and the path to restoration, reintegration, as it's commonly called in Martinist circles.
Okay. Would you say that path is essential to Martinist teachings?
It is. Martinist teachings seem to be broken down into a theurgical side and a mystical side. Okay. Mm-hmm. And some orders emphasize one to the detriment of the other, but Personally, I think they're both necessary to balance each other out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Martinism is not ceremonial. It's prayer and meditation, some simple rituals with visualization. As you get higher up in the theurgical stuff, the rituals get rather complex.
Got you. I coming myself from the Martinist tradition, I see it very distinctive from other styles within the Western mystery traditions, such as that of Freemasonry or systems like the Golden Dawn. I find it very unique. Many people kind of think of Martinism as almost kind of the graduate school of the Western mystery traditions. How would you kind of distinguish the principles in Martinism different from other Western mystery traditions?
Well, it is in many ways very close to primitive Rosicrucianism, the Rosicrucianism of the 17th century. There is even a tradition that was passed to Saint Martin by his good friend Rudolf de Salzmann, who seemed to be involved in the Order of Unknown Philosophers, which was a group going back to early Rosicrucian times. And yes, it differs in that it is highly devotional, and you don't see that aspect commonly in the Western mystery tradition. Mm-hmm. I mean, in Masonry, you see the grand architect of the universe being honored, but it's kind of a very impersonal encounter, whereas Martinism is intensely personal.
Gotcha.
And when you're speaking of devotional, are you speaking in terms of what we would consider to be Christian devotional practices of prayer, meditative reading, that sort of thing, when you talk about devotion?
Yeah, and spiritual exercises. There's some stuff that comes really close to being Jesuit.
Okay.
And Martinism has fragmented into 50 plus orders, and many of them have their own emphasis. Certainly in all of them, however, prayer is central. Many Martinist orders require praying the office 3 times a day.
Okay.
Some of the more Catholic influenced ones use the rosary. They're kind of like rosary clubs.
I had no idea about that. I didn't know that there was a that they were more Catholic influenced. Now, is Martinism considered to be compatible with Catholicism, or is it something that Catholics aren't allowed to be part of?
Some authors have tried to establish that connection, and Saint Martin required that his students be Catholic or Eastern Orthodox to belong to a sacramental tradition. He made a couple of exceptions for Protestants, but no, Saint Martin, as much as his doctrine differed from the official doctrine of the Catholic Church, seems to be by all means a devoted Catholic.
Okay.
Well, I think that kind of ties, though, into some of the ideas today is that, especially within the 20th century, Martinism has been kind of joined at the hip and tied together with the Gnostic Church, especially those that have come forth from the French Gnostic traditions. And in many cases, you had found that either the patriarchs or primates of various jurisdictions were themselves not only high degree Martinists, but in many cases, the patriarchs were also the Grand Masters of the Martinist orders. How do you feel that relationship is between Martinism and the current Gnostic current?
I think Martinism was essentially the wellspring that ignited the French Gnostic current. It isn't properly Gnostic in an ancient Gnostic way, because the fall of man does not occur because of a demiurge. It occurs because he became forgetful and fell into the prison of spirits that he was meant to guard. That is not a thought that appears in any classical Gnosticism, but has been very influential on modern Gnosticism, as well as his concept of reintegration. And he was probably the first person outside of the earlier theosophers who posited a doctrine of emanation, which of course is totally compatible with Gnosticism. I would actually say that it's a Neoplatonic system, but it has great compatibility with Gnosticism, especially Valentinian Gnosticism.
Okay, well, that's interesting because, I think one of the tensions that I have often perceived in modern Gnosticism is that you certainly have this initiatic line where you have these people who were involved with these various orders, which were founded before the discovery of Nag Hammadi. But then after that, you've got some of the modern Gnostic churches that are trying to incorporate scriptures that were previously unknown. And sometimes I feel like there's a bit, not so much of a disconnect, but it's a process of really trying to incorporate these two things into a coherent ecclesia.
Well, you have to remember about Nag Hammadi is that it was composed by about 30 different groups. Some of them have more resonance with the Martinist tradition than others, like the Sethians, who are pretty radical, not really the same as Martinists, because Martinism is still pro-cosmic. Even though we sort of fell into a trap, the transformation of that trap and the reintegration of the universe makes it pro-cosmic. The physical world is part of that. The book of nature, as Saint Martin described, is one of the guides to reintegration. So Gnostics would generally consider anything about the physical, or especially Sethians, anything about the physical world a trap. That is totally untrue of Martinism, however.
Interesting. One of the things that is sometimes said of the teachings of true esoteric or occult orders is that they're not necessarily secret in the doctrine that they teach, but that the traditions themselves provide keys for unlocking the true mysteries of the esoteric or the occult mysteries. Now, would you agree with kind of that theory on how Martinism works?
Well, there's a lot of education, and it's important. But Saint Martin said, Once you get to a certain point, burn your books, including mine.
Mm-hmm.
But in the process of moving up the Martinist order, there's a great deal of education, especially those that incorporate Elu Cohen stuff, which is Martinism's precursor, but had a very, very complex doctrine. And Sedmart has simplified things as he got older. There's definitely a development to his thought, starting about 1780 or 1770 up to his death in 1902. It's not like he stagnated. And I think that is one of the marks of a genuine mystic, being ready to change your mind based on your inner experience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I know for me, one of the topics that comes up with my students a lot is kind of what is initiation. And, in Martinism, it's very, very specific. And as I try to explain them, real initiation is not only symbolic. Real initiation, for me, is a conferring of an active spiritual element, an active spiritual power, and the application of that experience into an actual process. For me, it's a hidden method, it's a secret technique, it's all of those things.
Okay, looks like we may have lost Bishop Jacobs here for a second. Hopefully we will get him back. And as far as the initiation, it's one of those things that we often talk about, Bishop Ken, both here on the show and in privately in our private chats, is that we can put somebody through an initiation, or we can give them all this information on paper, but it's a combined effort, and you can put somebody through the steps or have them read something, but if there isn't right effort in other areas, it's not necessarily going to come together, and there's not necessarily going to be any kind of transformation. That's been my experience.
Right. And again, that's been kind of one of my, points with my students is that, yes, authentic initiation does give knowledge. It does give authority for us to use, a certain amount of power, if you will. But this genuine initiation, for me, is something that can only be found through authentic initiatic traditions, such as, the Martinist order. And from those teachings and traditions that have been carefully passed down from its members and from our Grand Masters in this chain of union that has represented this true initiatic tradition for a very long time. For me, Martinism, one of its kind of strong points is something that Martin had touched bases on when we still had him, was kind of this idea that kind of a central thing within Martinism is the book of nature. And that book of nature in Martinism is basically said to contain 5 pages. And these 5 pages include things like harmony and rhythm and motion. And these things, to me, remind me very much of a verse in Matthew. And that's Matthew chapter 6, verse 28 through 29, which is, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Yet I say unto thee that even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these." To me, kind of the primary importance that we really learn in Martinism is kind of the study of the book of nature and really observing and being totally aware and consciousness of what that is.
And I appreciate what you've had to say there. I just want to ask you something. When you talk about rhythm and motion, that is the being willing to observe the motion, the rhythms of nature, maybe the solar or lunar cycles.
All of those things are. All of those things are symbols of things, yes, that we observe. But yes, the cycles of nature. I mean, there are some things I simply won't discuss, but
I understand.
Because this is an initiatory.
It is indeed.
Right. But what I will say is that, yes, I mean, many of the points that you're pointing on is exactly what is being taught students. You know, when we're talking at things like rhythm and motion, what do those things imply? And what are we telling you then to observe? I mean, part of the practice, you know, when we're making Martinists, it isn't a matter of them simply us kind of opening up their head and pouring in knowledge. It's of them actual doing work and practice. And part of that is keeping a journal and observing things like the book of nature and everything that implies. Welcome back, brother. We see you.
Welcome back.
I had my router fixed, of course, until I'm on the show.
Of course. That's the way it usually goes. We are going to be having to wrap up fairly quickly, but I do have a couple more questions for you, Bishop Jacobs. First of all, can women be Martinists?
Yeah, in pretty much all orders, there are like one or two that exclude women because they have a prerequisite of regular masonry.
Okay.
And there are a few orders in which women cannot initiate, but they can do everything else. For the most part, yes, the sexes are on equal footing in the tradition.
Okay. And just another question. How does a person become a Martinist? It's not like there's a lodge on every corner in most cities, but if a person was interested in pursuing a Martinist path, what would they need to do?
These days, there is a substantial net presence, and I encourage people to Google it because there is a lot out there. Some of it is a little specious, but there's quite a bit out there. Pierce Vaughn has translated some of the original texts. It's all online, unscribed. And probably you become a Martinist by email contact with one of the orders. It does require physical presence for the initiation, and really you should be physically present for most of the lodge work. So it has to be relatively nearby. But the movement has been expanding greatly since about 1990.
Okay.
So larger cities, there tend to be lodges. I mean, we have a lodge in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is an odd place for one. But yes, it's around, and if you're serious, it's not difficult to contact them, most of them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Martin. Thank you again for coming on. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we do appreciate you being on the show. I want to remind everyone in news that the registration for the Johannite Church's Conclave is open. Make sure you check their website, johannite.org/conclave 2014. You can go to their Facebook page. You can go to their website. I'm sure that Tony will even put a link up on our Facebook page and maybe even in the notes so our viewers can find that. You had some information about the HEC parish in Chicago.
Yes, my friends in the Johannite parish, St. John the Revelator, in Chicago here, are having their monthly Nosh, GNOSH, and Gospel of Mary study this Saturday. You can find out more about it at www.meetup.com/mission BRFP. And I'm going to be there. Would love to see viewers there. And so I do want to thank Bishop Jacobs for coming on the show, as well as Bishop Ken for answering so many great questions. We had an information-packed show today. So, Bishop Ken, do you want to?
Absolutely. You know, again, we do appreciate everyone's feedback. You can make sure you leave YouTube comments. We both try to get back when time. In fact, last week's show, we had some great comments going back and forth with our listeners. You can always hit us up by email at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Talk Gnosis on Facebook. And we've got a great show coming up next week.
Yeah.
One of your very close friends for a long time, probably one of your closest friends, I would say, a retired clergyman. He's a professor of history. I mean, this man's resume is pretty impressive. You want to tell us a little bit about him?
Yes, my friend, my dear, dear, dear friend, Dr. Gregory Singleton, he is a retired clergyman and a retired professor of history, is going to be discussing the intersection between esoteric and mainstream Christianity. Are these two perspectives as separate as we might think? So this is going to be, I think, a fantastic show. Absolutely fantastic show.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So I'm looking forward to everybody joining us next week. And as always, this has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you did enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organization. No animals were harmed during the production of this show. For more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Stay warm.
Thank you.